Hello, and this is part 4 of the Dissecting Sproul with a panel of people. With Fox has just turned up, great. So with Floyd Fp, Fox in the Know, John FC. Oh, bugger!
Dropout.
Sorry.
That's okay, Rump. You were you had the stream on, didn't you?
Yeah.
Hearing yourself?
Yeah. Sorry about that. Yes, and then we've got John mcdropout, Mischievous Heathen, and Turdle 2080. Goodness knows where he gets it from. And yes, and so we're going to review the last few parts that I must admit I haven't watched all of them, but about RC Sproul's Defending the Faith, and about an hour or so's time, Trey will be invited. He may not wish to come in, and we'll take it from there. So I want to just quickly re-review. Obviously, we'll have a summary at some point from everybody about the overall impression of this series, and hopefully we'll get to some near the 25th video. First of all, I'd like to re-review number 20 that we did, and I've got some notes here that I want to show, and see if anybody. Let's go through those. And if anybody wants to comment, let me just present this. Right. So can you see that?
Yep.
Oh, great. Okay, so these are my notes. So I'm just quick because I was feeling a bit rough at the end of the last one because I had a bit of a headache at the end of it. And so these are my notes on. These are just my I haven't had a chance really to edit them, but just these are my notes on the what I regard as the key episode, which is on the self-existence lark. And this is just me making notes as going along. And one thing I noticed, he presents those 4 possibilities that we discussed in the last analysis, was that he ended up with 4 possibilities and then said he eliminated the. I should have those up there. Let's show the 4 possibilities he offered for those are the 4 possibilities. For reality that he mentions. These are the key, but basically his key thesis of this whole thing is it's an illusion, it's self-created, self-existent, or created by something that is self-existent. And he's eliminated these 2, and then says, well, therefore, by the impossibility of the contrary, it must be one of these 2. It must have this self-existent thing. And I'm sure Fox would like to detail his ideas about infinite regress as definitely something he considers seriously. And so that he says in part 20, therefore. That because of these, he's eliminated those 2. Therefore, it's got to be the self-existent option, completely ignoring the quantum possibility that I favour about an uncaused event, a sort of quantum indeterminacy generating the universe, or Fox's oneself advocated quite a lot about the regressive. Does anybody want any comments, or should I just quickly run through these?
Go ahead.
I'll just go through them, shall I? Karen. Anyway, interrupt me anyway. If you've got anything interesting to say, just interrupt. Otherwise, I'm just going to go on just to quickly cover what I wanted to go through. And there's just this is just detailing what he said, and then this is what. Am I still presenting properly? Right. Okay. This is just saying that he thinks that something doesn't necessarily exist. Just because we can conceive of it, and so if you conceive of an acorn, and he's saying that some people say this, and so he's saying that doesn't necessarily follow. But his main argument is that if anything exists, then, first of all, he says that there's nothing illogical about the existence of a self-existent being. There's nothing. It is possible, but then again, I would argue there's nothing logical about it to be a purple unicorn being self-existent either, and he doesn't demonstrate why one self-existent thing is more likely than another. It's just, well, the self-existent thing, and indeed, you can argue logically there is no reason why you can't have a self-existent thing, just as we could argue there's no reason why you couldn't have an infinite number of things.
Yeah, I think we can grant self-existence, but why does the self-existence need to be a disembodied mind, or why can't the self-existent thing be the sum total of the universe itself? It's the sum total of matter and energy, or some sort of quantum realm where it comes from.
He does talk about. Carol.
No, I think RC Sproul makes the assertion there that he says something about like if something exists, then there must be something self-existent to create it at the beginning, and he brings in the idea of aseity and the idea that this self-existent thing has to have the power to be within itself. I think he says a lot of times.
That's right. I've got that. Yeah, that's
so he starts using that phrase a lot, and I think that's really the linchpin to it. Is he's giving it that property. Once you kind of ascribe that property to it, it becomes sort of almost logically plausible to put it in that role, right?
Yeah. Yeah, and I've got that just down here. Actually, I was going to make. That's what Floyd was saying about the why can't it be a mind or something? What or be part of unity goes into that into lecture 21. I don't know if you've got notes on that, so we're going to cover that. That's the next lecture where he just says it can't just be the universe because if he calls it some sort of pulsating thing in the corner of the universe, and if you've got it's still different from the rest of the universe.
Yeah, his characterization of the Big Bang I thought was laughable.
Oh my God.
It's just appalling, wasn't it? he basically got the sort of school child's. I mean, everything. This is what is running theme. He's got a sort of school child's idea about how the world works, and if I can't think about any other reason for something, therefore it's got to be my It's a classic argument from ignorance throughout. I've got this idea. There's no alternative idea. I mean, this is just how we ended up with the idea of chariots in the sky being what the sun was. I mean, his whole philosophy is an argument from ignorance. His whole reasoning. Yes, so I was saying he doesn't. So this self-existent being, Lark, he just says, well, okay, it's logically possible, therefore it is. And then, of course, he completely rejects. Actually, that's okay. Yes, and so of course this is an uncaused self-existent being for a start. But when you say later on down here. Yes, and so he then goes on to say, because the argument that John just made, that if something exists, because something exists, and therefore everything he believes has to have a cause except the self-existent thing, therefore it's all contingent things, therefore there must be something that caused it at the start, therefore that necessarily means you have to have a self-existent being. But again, this ignores the the infinite regression option that Fox has mentioned a number of times, and of course the uncaused event, because of course events can be caused and uncaused, and those events that are caused called effects. Right, and then of course he slips in. This is a classic Sproul. He slips in all these other properties that Trey is familiar with. All these other properties. That he just slips. He says because it's self-existent, therefore it has to be eternal. Where did that come from? No justification for that at all. He just says so.
Yeah, I mean, he uses a weird semantic claim that there's no time when it did not exist, but it's very strange because he's talking about the thing that's supposed to have created time, right? Mm-hmm. So it's very there's a really weird switching of where he's sort of using that phrase time.
Yeah, it's a typical thing which Trey does as well, which is he's talked about causality up until this point. So really, all we need to account for is something which is uncaused, right? So self-existence just has to mean at this point something which exists which wasn't caused to exist, right? Yep. That's all we need.
Yep.
That's all we need for this argument. I mean, there are more sophisticated contingency arguments that might say there are other features of a self-existent being that it would have to have. But that's all that Sproul is really entitled at this point to invoke, right? It's to say that, look, we've shown that we have to have had a first cause that in and of itself wasn't caused, and this is what we mean by self-existent. But then to go into these absurd additional categories at this point, they're just things like pure being and pure actuality and aseity and all the rest of it. It's just superfluous. It's not needed yet, and there's not been an argument made for why we need all of these redundant features.
Right. I think I agree. I mean, I think it's about adding all those features without really saying it, right? When you say something like pure actuality or aseity, right? I think it's really about adding the eternality and the omnipotence of this entity, right? And he wants to slip it in right early so that when we come around to it eventually, his God looks like the only one that has all those properties.
Yeah, and Trey does it as well, so that we can't then say, well, there's nothing logically, and Trey's got this a lot of the time, he gets, well, there's nothing logically impossible about an uncaused event. Well, he would say no, because the only things that can be uncaused are the things that have these other qualities or properties to it.
Can you see the properties in my thing there? That's the properties that he often suggests that that a self-existent thing has to have. That you and Floyd actually had a discussion about these very things.
I think the reason why these things are tacked on are to try to eliminate the possibility of any other candidate, because remember remember what we've got here is supposedly a logically necessary argument, right? It's logically necessary that God exists. So the only way you could do that is for it to be logically impossible that anything else could basically fulfill the job application of like a first cause.
Yeah.
So that's what this is doing in this argument, and it's, there are arguments to be made for why you can narrow it down further to get to this particular type of first cause, but they've not been presented at all through this entire apologetic series. And this is the reason why when you talk to Trey, because he only has this very rudimentary and basic understanding of the issues from this series, there just isn't the inbuilt resource to handle those kind of claims, which is why he then just spouts the word salad.
And ask you a question, yeah.
And for Sproul's purposes, Sproul is presenting to a particular audience. He's making a series. He's not in a one-to-one situation with an atheist in a hangout who maybe is informed. So again, it's just what I find really quite interesting about this entire series is it just so poorly equips apologists. It just gives them a nice story.
It's more that it's not an understanding, is it? It's not. It's assertions.
It's really not. It's really poor. It's a really poor show. For they're going to go out and they're going to say, they're going to talk about things like self-existent beings and necessary beings without a good understanding of what it means to be a necessary being or what it means to be a self-existent being. And in this case, all that can really be said is a necessary being is something which isn't caused, right? Or a self-existent being is something which isn't caused. Because that's all of the scope of the arguments offered so far allow for.
Yeah, and now this is the point that you, and in fact this is a discussion we had, I think this was similar to a post that you made, Fox, and Floyd, I think was part of the discussion you had about a year ago, and I was joining in. These are the points I think we came up with, that the other properties they try and slip in, the fact that it's unique. Well, who says you can't have more than one self-existent being? Now, Trey goes on to something about the fact that if you have two, then one becomes contingent on the other. So what? Who's to say it can't change? Who's to say that a self-existent thing can't change? As this is pure actuality bollocks, of course. And of course, he claims that there's no potentiality. So hold on, Jesus was a potential regards. I mean, I hate these terms, potentiality actor. I think they're just utter crap.
Self-existence just means that nothing created, nothing caused it. It addresses why it exists. It doesn't address what happens to it after it exists.
Absolutely. That's the key point. And so there's no reason why it's immutable, which I'm sure I've got down here. Somewhere. Yeah, I can't remember.
At 18. Actually, I want to point out something that Sproul says that I think that Trey actually disagrees with. At the 750 mark, Sproul states that it is rationally conceivable that is conceivable that nothing exists, that you can conceive of nothing, and Trey disagrees with that because once you conceive that, that conceiving is something. No, Trey. Map reality.
It's just
your conception of it is the map, and you're conceiving the reality, which would be the nothing.
That's one of the most stupid things Trey has ever said. The fact that if you can think about nothing, therefore it ceases, the nothing, whatever it is, ceases to be nothing.
So I think Sproul disagrees with Trey here. I'm pretty sure at the 750 mark, this is part 20 of self-existence. He states that it's rationally conceivable that nothing exists.
Yeah.
So Trey, you better freshen up on your Sproul there.
But it wouldn't be the first time that Sproul actually argues against himself in some senses, right? Even in this apologetic, he actually ends up countering a lot of what he wants to put on there.
I'm sure he does say elsewhere that he says he makes appeals to nothing. He says, well, if there ever was a time where there was nothing, there would still be nothing. So he does talk about nothingness.
Yeah.
That sounds like a fantastic.
This is something that's really quite an important thing in apologetics. William Lane Craig talks about philosophical nothing. They make a big talk about it because they want to say, well, if there was ever a state of affairs in which there was absolutely nothing, there would still be absolutely nothing, or it would be impossible for something to begin to exist from that, or how can you have something which is nothing cause something to begin to exist. So they play all of these games to try to bolster cosmological arguments. They never take off the table that it's logically impossible for there to be nothing. Because if, of course, it's logically impossible for there to be nothing, then that means that it's logically necessary that there always was something, right? So you don't then need to appeal to anything else. You could just say, well, it's always going to have been the case that there was something.
Yes, I mean, this is the argument I got into Matt Slick last week when he was saying nothing. And I said, and I used the Aussie explanation that we don't know that nothing, even if it did exist, that it's not unstable, like a pen on its tip. That if you're talking about something with nothing, which has no space, no dimensions, then what are the rules for that? I mean, we just can't conceive of what the rules for that would be.
There's nothing there. There's literally nothing to prevent or stop. There's no laws.
There's no barriers.
No rules,
there's no barriers, are there?
There's no conditions to prevent anything from happening. So this idea that it is just a dogmatic assertion, that it's counterintuitive to think of something arising when prior to that there'd been absolute nothingness. So I think Trey, because Trey's got so muddled in his own thinking on this and he's so enamoured with his own ability to just deflect objections. I think what he thinks that he can play that little word game, and that can stop any talk about philosophical nothingness. But then again, he'll still play the old apologist card of, well, Lawrence Krauss talks about nothing and he doesn't know what he's talking about. That old chestnut always appears. So I mean, it's not surprising that Sproul's a little bit more on the ball than Trey is on this.
At the 1845 mark, Sproul finally says something that Trey often says. He states that self-existent eternal being is changeless because he is never losing the power of being, nor is it gaining because it is what it is.
Yeah,
losing the power of being. Now, I change. Let's say one day I have a brown hair, and then the next day it turns gray. So I turn into gray hair. Okay, so I lost a brown hair and I gained a gray hair. I'll grant you that. But how does that imply losing the power of being? What the hell is the power of being?
Well, this is back to this Platonic stuff that I think he's got this idea. I don't know whether he believes this, but he seems to believe in some sort of Platonic realm where all these properties exist up there. I mean, this is where he gets the problems with intentionality. And where does intentionality come from? When you have unintentionality and not realising just the rearrangement of matter. I mean, I could turn Trey into a lobster and he would lose his personhood. And similarly, I could turn, the detritus at the bottom of a pond into a person if I had the ability to rearrange the atoms in the relevant order, and I would suddenly acquire personhood and intentionality. But Trey, of course, is too stupid or too has a delusion of how he wishes things to be to accept that.
Yeah, pure being. I'm assuming it's something to do with Aquinas.
Yeah.
Aquinas talks about degrees of being. So it's like degrees of perfection. Like we are imperfect, but we are also imperfect in our way of being. We don't have this pure being. We don't have this unadulterated essence, which isn't mediated by other essences or universals. We don't have the power of I guess the power of being is just to there isn't any universals that God partakes in. He just is his own essence, and it's as simple as that. And that supposedly is preferable to the way that other contingent things exist. But it's a very muddled and I suppose a contentious metaphysics to adopt, and it's not logically necessary that we have to invoke it. And what Trey is fond of doing, which is what Sproul does, is to just say, well, this is the way that metaphysics is. And therefore this is logically necessary. Well, actually, no. Everything in metaphysics pretty much is up for grabs and is contentious, and things like pure being really are quite outdated and are not really well used.
Aristotelian. I mean, he's just a load of 2,000-year-old bollocks that he's along with his Platonic sort of Platonic view of the world, and he's fixed in that. And I just want to quickly skate through these properties now that I've got you here. I think it might be quite useful for people who watch this to say what are these other properties that people slip in, like Trey. And so there's the fact that it's obviously uncaused is by definition the A there. That's the one that obviously is the property that Floyd was talking about. That's the only thing that by definition a self-existent thing has to have to be self. That's the only qualification. The only property it has to have to qualify as self-existent. And then all these other ones are slipped in. So there's the fact that it's unique. Why can't you have multiple uncaused self-existent things? They're not supposed to be able to change, but apparently this one, God presumably created Jesus and dinosaurs, or I don't know how much Trey believes he got involved with creating things. I can't remember what pure actuality means. That presumably I can't remember what that is now. Presumably means it can't cease to be. Presumably. Then he also slips in these other properties about it being omnipotent. And then, of course, he tries to slip in the fact that there's got to be a conscious entity as well for some reason. Then there's the immutability bit. And then, of course, he slips in the fact that it's got to be timeless. I suppose if it's... No, you see... Well, self-existent, I don't know whether you would argue the time... Do we... Yeah, well, he thinks, obviously, God is timeless. But, yeah, I think we just exist for all time, isn't that? Fox, that's the... No, that's not what time... No, he's... No, he.
Well, time
yes.
is matter related to motion, right?
Yes.
So if you are unchanging and uncaused, and you don't occupy any space, you're not moving. There isn't any matter there. Then you are essentially timeless for Trey, I guess. That's
yes.
Isn't that a really oversimplified definition of time, though? I mean.
Yeah.
I was under the impression that time was like a really, the dimension of time is a really complicated sort of thing.
Well, it's tend to be. I mean, modern physics would say that time is a dimension. Okay, so space-time is a manifold. It's a four-dimensional manifold. It's not just the case. It's not just the case that we have things which change. That, and then we derive time from it. That's a somewhat outdated view of time. So yeah, it is oversimplified. But even then, the time isn't something that we necessarily have a good grasp on or understand, or is even necessarily fundamental.
I just was never
inversion property.
I just was never really comfortable with Trey's. Well, I'm not comfortable with Trey's use of any word, but I mean, I always just kind of cringe when he just goes, "Oh, well, what's time? Time is matter related to motion." But it just seems like a really oversimplified use or definition that fits his sort of script.
Well, it's an assertion, isn't it? I mean, we don't know what we can measure time with the movement of with motion of matter, but we don't know that's all we know to measure it.
I mean, Trey's view of time is actually quite controversial because Trey's essentially a presentist, so he thinks that things come in and out of existence all constantly. So he thinks that only the present time actually exists. So the start of this hangout doesn't exist in the past, or the end of this hangout doesn't exist in the future. And there are a lot of people in philosophy who disagree with that view, but it's a very contentious position. So it isn't as if we have this down, but I think for when usually Trey's talking to people, we tend to give him the benefit of the doubt. Say, okay, that's a definition we can at least understand and go work with. But I don't think people just say, "Oh yeah, of course that's what time is." That's stupid. Of course it is. It's just matter related to motion.
Is presentism? Is that just the A theory of time? Is there a difference between the A theory of time and presentism?
Presentism is sort of like a subspecies of the A theory of time. So there's generally considered to be moving spotlight view and growing block view, which the thing they share in common is they think there's something distinct and special about the present. But what the presentist says, the thing that is special and unique about the present is that it's the only thing that exists, is the present. It's the only time that exists even, and that the past and the future aren't just different in relation to having a property of presentness. It's that they just literally do not exist.
Right. Okay.
So it's something that's kind of it's supposedly a more intuitive view of time, but even saying that is probably going too far, because you get into all kinds of discussions about how we perceive time and how we use time in our best descriptions of reality, and the thing is that most cosmologists tend to be B theorists, so they tend to be eternalists.
Yeah.
So there's all sorts of issues, but it isn't at all simple or straightforward. And I think if there isn't such a thing, say for instance, if you're not a presentist, I'm not a presentist. If you're not a presentist, then you don't have to accept that there is such a thing as objective temporal becoming. So you can just have a block universe that existed eternally, never came into being. It just always is, and that is what reality is. It's just this block. And there are different parts within the block. There is a series, there is progression. You know, there's change within the block of in what is instantiated at one particular slice of the block compared to another. But Trey seemed to think that the B theory of time is absurd because change is obvious, and that. I must admit,
it doesn't. I don't like the idea of a B theory of time because I don't, with the quantum indeterminacy and things, I can't quite see how you can, unless you have got lots of multiple universes. Well, which of course is the multiverse theory, but yeah, that's. Anyway, perhaps that's going off a little bit. But anyway, one of the other properties is timeless. When I was saying, of course, he means that's outside time, but of course there's nothing stopping it occupying all of time, like being a block, is there?
Yeah.
So there's nothing.
Yeah. So the self-existent block.
Yeah. So these are all the self-existent properties that
never came into being. It's another option that you could have on the table that Trey would obviously just dismiss.
Similarly, there's no reason why a self-existent thing has to be spaceless. Well, of course, I would argue that we know there are some self-existent things like electrons and things that come into being, photons and things that we see in the lab that are come into being, and they don't have any of these properties.
Well, that's the thing. That's it's interesting that you bring that up because a lot of people would say, well, if you're just saying uncaused equals self-existence, and naturally maybe there is something to be said for the distinction. We might find that odd to say that things like, well, isn't everything electrons coming into existence uncaused? Does it make sense to call them self-existent? Some people might find that a bit odd, and actually they want to mean something else by self-existent, as in maybe you mean by something that's self-existent, something that's always existed. But again, I think for the point of this discussion, all we really need to talk about, we can even drop the label of self-existence, and we can say actually the thing that Sproul doesn't talk about, because he equates it to self-creation, which of course it isn't, is the idea that there can be events that can be uncaused.
Yeah.
So that's not one of
four possibilities.
But really I raised that
and I did. I raised that. It's when we went to the four possibilities. I raised exactly that point that my favoured, preferred option is the uncaused event. And I would agree that it would seem a bit odd to call an electron that came into existence self-existent. Yes, it's not a term that a physicist would certainly use. Yes.
Yeah. So I think the problem here is we've been, the other options on the table, and say a block view, or even on presentism, a first moment of temporal becoming that was uncaused.
And your infinite thing, of course.
Or an infinite regress, which isn't my view, but it's just.
I keep referring to it as yours because you presented it so many times to invalidate Trey. I think about.
So these are other views that if Sproul was being honest.
And of course he doesn't. He said one of the comments he made in that episode 20 was that we've eliminated the rest of the things through the contrary of the impossibility of the contrary, which is just an argument from ignorance. It's appalling to then say he's already established all the other possibilities and therefore he's left with those two. So the other one here we got he's also Sproul. I don't know whether he actually says these other things, but certainly the one that Trey offers that also therefore something self-existent has to be immaterial. And then of course the other controversial one is that it can cause things to be changed. This is classic Trey, isn't it? That something like God, he calls it about the effector and the affected thing, and like a footprint in the sand. But of course, in everything we know, anything that causes a change, following just from Newton's third law, but it's a fundamental thing that if anything that causes a change is itself changed. And to be able to claim that the things can cause change without being changed is. And of course, this thing about Jesus actually up here about the. That seems to me, I don't see how you can argue that something like Jesus is not a change if it's part of God. It's definitely manifesting itself, and he claims all the other properties of it, Jesus, are accidental, the humanity part of it, but there's got to be something different. If any part of Jesus is God, he's certainly doing something being there, even if he's acquired all these other accidental properties, as he calls it. It's very different from, certainly, unless there's some essence, unless you're going to reduce, there's nothing actually in Jesus at all, it's all humanity, so what's left that is part of God? Presumably he would regard as some sort of essence or something, but it's still there and it wasn't there, presumably physically it has to be there, which it wasn't, at least in the manifestation it was. Oh, God.
And that the whole accidental properties thing is such an arbitrary distinction. To me, it's exactly the same type of distinction as microevolution.
Yeah, it's just a cop-out, isn't it? It's just a way of trying to avoid the fact that we know there's Jesus character, which he's got to support. How on earth can we ad hoc put something to try and fix the problem? Oh, we'll say, actually, all this Jesus thing, actually, it wasn't. In fact, you'd have to say every part of Jesus was not part of God.
Well, I think that just briefly on that, I think the whole issue of essences. I mean, you would say that the essence of being human is to be material, right? So if Jesus is a human, then Jesus has a human essence, and the essence of that is to be material. But of course, the essence of God, the Father, is to be immaterial, right? So it seems that that's a contradiction.
Oh God, you haven't broken the law of non-contradiction, have you?
Right. I mean, I think that's a weird distinction, right? Like I was trying to get to that with Trey in my hangout yesterday. That like what do we mean by essences, and are we really? I mean, what happens when those essences seem to have traits that contradict each other? That's really the contention, right? Because I think a thing can have more than one essence, providing that none of those properties from that essence are in contradiction.
Well, I'm not sure about that. I think the whole point of an essence is that it's supposed to be essential. Like I'm not sure. I'm not sure the idea of. I mean, then where do you draw the line? I mean, what a better way would be talking about is intrinsic and extrinsic properties, which is what I think philosophers tend to talk about now, rather than this. I mean, so if something is essential, it's that thing which, if it wasn't for the case, it didn't have that essence, those essential properties, it wouldn't exist. And I think those essential properties are what we call the essence, right? So you can have more than one essential property, I guess, but you still only have one essence. So Jesus has an essence that is a human, but he might have essential properties within that, like, say, having at least one mother. Of course, he did have a father, so we wouldn't say that was an essential property, or it's not a biological father, or it's essential to, maybe it's an essential property to have a heart or a brain that functions, or something like that.
Well, I would have argued there's no such thing as an essence, of course. This is all.
Well, I think you can think that essence are kind of distinct things, or you can think that essences are just essentially ways of ascribing properties that, if it wasn't for the case, if X didn't have property Y, then X would not exist, or X would not be X. Therefore, property Y is essential property of X. You could make those kind of distinctions without the metaphysics of without having the old-fashioned metaphysics of Plato and people like that. To say that essences or haseities are these kind of things that float around as abstract ethers or whatever it is. Okay. So there's a way around it, but I think that's very strange, and it's not something that makes a whole lot of sense.
Yeah, I mean, I would argue that there are no. I mean, there are essential properties that a human being has, but as I say, I could rearrange Trey into a lobster. I couldn't do anything like his beard probably, but I could turn him into a lobster, and he would still materially just be a rearrangement of the atoms he was. And oh dear, apparently his essence has disappeared, presumably if he's a lobster. Yes. Now, Trey, Floyd, you've got about a quarter of an hour left or something, haven't you? Or I want to make sure you've got your contribution in before you go.
Yeah.
Do you want
to move on to 21?
Yeah, let's move on to 21. Yeah, let's move on to 21.
Yeah. At 21, he brings up the Big Bang, and it seems like he just butchers the description of the Big Bang. He calls the Big Bang organization to disorganization, and he calls it a pulsating core,
pulsating source and things. Yeah, he changes. It's something pulsating. Sometimes it's a source. Sometimes it's something else.
Yeah, he called it a pulsating core. Does any scientist, any astrologer call the Big Bang a pulsating core? And
he describes it as being a very popular theory in his lecture, but I've never heard of it.
And he claims that singularity is an organization. Organization in what way? I mean, the laws of physics break down, as we move closer to the beginning of that event and so forth. How is it exactly an organization?
I think it means it's small.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's
a mess is all over your bedroom, but if it's all in the cupboards, it's small and therefore organized.
Yeah, I think he's using this relative size to describe it as simple, but I think that's right. I mean, once you start compressing all of once you start talking about higher pressures and higher energies like that, it's an incredibly disorganized state, and any expansion would allow it to organize itself.
Yeah, and this pulsating core. Pulsating means boom, 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 boom. I mean, the Big Bang does not pulsate.
I think he's trying to sort of compare it to like a pulsar or a black hole, which might have like a pulsating
they don't pulse.
style.
Pulsar spins. You know?
Yeah, that's right. They're not actually they don't pulse in the sense
They're not pulsing,
of,
right? Yeah, oscillating.
They spin. Yeah.
In their rotation, but but I think that's what he's really trying to give them a picture of, as if it's just all this mysterious space talk. And I don't know if he really understands it.
No, I don't.
Yeah, I think he's just clueless about about this stuff. He's just he comes off as like a good old grandfather that that the grandkids sit on his lap and he tells them stories about common sense and stuff like that. I mean that's how he comes off of. At the 950 mark, he claims that we have the answer in Christianity. But Christianity never addresses the Big Bang, and Christianity, the Bible claims that the Earth was made in the beginning. So, cosmology does not say the Earth was made in the beginning. So, as far as I'm concerned, Genesis 1:1, if you accept the scientific claims, Genesis 1:1 falsifies Christianity because it says the Earth was made in the beginning. It wasn't made in the beginning, therefore. The very beginning of your Bible is false.
Yeah, he claims Christianity posits a God that has the power of motion, the ability to move the unmoving. What else does he say? It's got to have the power of motion within itself.
Law of inertia.
I think that's a really generic sort of generalized description of the God of Christianity. I don't think that's really all that accurate.
I mean, it's so it's just this is like the sort of explanation a primary school teacher would give to someone. Yeah, you need a force to move something. Yes, and therefore it's the source of force. I mean, these terms are just so childish and so simple. They're just assertions, and they're so nebulous and ambiguous. They don't actually mean anything. Oh, just
yeah. He put the power of motion and the power of being kind of in the same sentence or whatever at one point, and it's neither of those things require power. I mean, if something's in motion, it stays in motion, and something that has quote unquote being just has it. It doesn't require power. He's trying to, make it so that some entity has to create these things by attributing power to them.
Yes, he claims as the source of Aristotle. Because he cites Aristotle's got to be correct, of course. Talked about the unmoved mover, which is back to this business about something being able to affect something without itself being affected. And then, of course, so therefore Christianity, because Aristotle agrees, therefore we must be right, because it's a classic argument, for instance, we have an explanation, this power of motion, therefore that's it. Again, an argument from ignorance.
Well, maybe there's a reason why he talks about something about the singularity pulsating, right? Because imagine if the singularity wasn't moving, it would be an unmoved thing. So then perhaps it could be an unmoved mover. Maybe that's Sproul trying to prevent anyone in the audience putting two and two together on that.
Yeah, I mean, did you guys notice that, like, how he described like the pulsating core as compared to the God, and he draws a big circle, and then he says that this is the universe, or this is existence, and says that the core must be located somewhere within this existence. And then puts a little point outside and says that's God, and that he must be influencing existence from the outside. And I don't know. I was wondering if that was like at first he did it, and I thought that he was visualizing the composition fallacy, right? Like, isn't that exactly what he's doing? Is he's saying that because the universe contains things that are contingent or derived, there must be that element that started it, or that existence that we're calling this power of being, is somehow can't be within that composition, within that totality.
And this also is an interesting point that I keep on meaning to bring up actually with various people about whether we regard the universe. And I think just briefly, I think Turdle was agreeing with me that do we regard the universe as simply the sum of its parts, or I think as one guy was having an argument, I can't remember his name now, was having a debate with Trey about 2 weeks ago when he was trying to put this model forth. The universe itself is unchanging and self-existent, but the things inside it are changing and contingent, and therefore that's the model he sort of presents in the universe, whereas I I regard the universe as the sum of its parts, and therefore it's changing all the time. I don't regard this an unchanging universe. So I regard his counterpoint to Trey as actually invalid. I don't know if other people feel what they feel about the universe, whether they regard it's an unchanging thing or changing thing.
Well, I think you could say it changes from the perspective of being within it, but if there was sort of like an external view, which seems to be observed, but you could at least conceive of, if you were to observe the entirety of it, it wouldn't change, because what would it change into? It's the entirety of all that there is the universe. But if you were within any particular region, then you would observe change.
So you think some external view of the universe would not perceive any change in the universe?
If you were to observe it not just at any one time, but completely, like say if it was a block, for instance, then the block would not be changing. It would be what it is, but within the perspective from within the block would be that they would be changing.
But the block is okay. So yes, I was thinking these blocks, of course, in time it's a block, but surely in terms of the space it's occupying, it's not a block, is it?
It is. It's got space. It's got space. Well, on some views of it, it's got spatial parts and temporal parts. So at some time t, there is a space. If you think of it four-dimensional, there are four-dimensional slices at each. So the four-dimensional block, or the worm view, if you will, at each slice there is something different.
So does that mean the block has to be the size of all possible space?
Yeah, it would be. It would be the entirety of all that there is.
But that would actually have to be infinitely big, wouldn't it? I mean, if we regard the universe.
Well, it might not be, because it might be that the universe has edge. It has an edge in time and an edge in space.
So the block would be as big as that all the time.
Yes, that would be what it is, and that exists eternally. That's an eternal thing. It doesn't have anything extra.
Well, I mean, I've been reading quite a bit about about 3 months ago, and I was reading some guy who was going about they almost think the universe has to be infinite. It can't be closed. And if so,
well, it could be.
Block.
Yeah. So
your block. So you've got an infinite block now.
It could. Well, why? Well, is there any logical point where you can't have the block be any bigger than it is?
Yeah, this is always the thing about philosophers. They just say they always go on deductive and logical necessity, and of course, whereas I think it's physical necessity.
It's logical possibility, but
logical possibility rather than physical.
Well, if the universe, even if it's not say spatially infinite, but is temporally infinite, right? That's possible.
Yeah, Floyd. Yeah, we're going to catch all of Floyd's comments in case he.
Yeah, sorry.
Sorry, no, it's my fault. I'm wittering on. So do you want anything more to say, Floyd, about number 21?
Yeah, let me just quickly look at my notes here.
Because you've also seen the other. I want to catch your comments on number 25, and the other one, and number 24 as well that you've seen.
Yeah, I doubt we'll be able to get to all the way to part 25. I guess.
We might carry on afterwards. I don't know how much more time people want to.
Well, Sproul then compares this. I guess I won't touch on the changing. I mean, we've been going over changing for I don't know how long. Yeah. But he then compares. Okay, can we say this unmoved mover is the God of the Bible? So we have theologians like Augustine, Anselm, and Aquinas. They try to redo the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob into the God of the philosophers, and I flat out don't think it works. I don't think the God of the Bible is the God of philosophers. I think all the omni attributes assigned to this God, and so forth, and try to turn it into an infinite, spaceless, timeless, immaterial, unchanging God. Is that sort of God capable of interacting with humanity? And and we have a very Zeus-like God in the Old Testament. Now Trey will say, "Oh, it's analogical language." Well, for what? I mean, what does it mean literally? Does like when God repents? It says God repents in the Old Testament. Oh, well, does it mean he doesn't really repent? Well, if he doesn't really repent, what exactly does he do? It just seems like a very Zeus type God, and where in the Bible does it say that God is pure actuality, pure being, and so forth? That's all later theology, just trying to fit within the Bible. And I love how actually back in part 20, he ended with the Bible saying Yahweh is I am what I am. Well, that's very unclear of what that actually means.
Oh God, yes, that I am what I am. And
Yeah.
that's the sort of thing that you expect
Yeah.
as a bouncer on a nightclub to say. Can I come in, please? No, you can't. Who are you
Yeah.
then? I'm what I am. Bring out some sort of theological, philosophical truth from that statement. It's just extraordinary.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I mean,
they claim it's the law of identity, for example.
yeah, like Floyd. I mean, I wonder what you thought of that, because he makes that assertion twice, once at the end of 20 and once at the end of 21. He says, that we've now eliminated all the other possibilities except for this self-existent entity, and we're only arguing about the name, is how he says it.
Yeah.
And I wonder what you guys thought of that. Like, have we really eliminated all the possibilities, and are we really talking about a single entity, right? I mean, can we say that this self-existent entity is a singular thing? And
Well, that's what I was. Well, if you remember that list I showed you when I was showing you my little list earlier, up here. There's this list here. You've got no. Up here. So I copied and pasted. That was with the properties there, which was the uniqueness of it. That was one of the ones we were discussing earlier. Yes, I can. Oh, we've lost John.
No, yeah, I'm still here.
Okay, just showing we have covered that. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. And because I think, yeah. See you later, Floyd. It was good.
Oh, rats!
Right, and I think that is the difference, right? I mean, now he's going to move into 22, where he's going to sort of try to make the comparison between the God of the Bible and the God of the philosophers, and like, I don't know. I don't really think he's made the case at that point, even though he's taken 2 sections to try to make that case, right?
Yeah.
No, he definitely hasn't made that case. And even I mean, that's part of that my big problem with his whole pulsating. What
core
did he call
of the universe?
It?
Yeah.
Yeah, core of the universe is that's nobody believes that, but it's just such a weird representation, because it's almost like he pictures like this pulsating core of the universe is just some sort of matter factory or whatever that just here it pumps out a star and pumps out a planet and pumps out a car, and it's just such a weird way to describe it. And he doesn't ever address the idea of just essentially a self-existent universe. He describes this quote-unquote pulsating core that seems to generate the rest of the universe, but he never addresses the idea of a universe that has always existed. At one point was a singularity, and now it explodes into what we see today.
Well, he was
ahead.
sort of saying that if it's self-existent, then he did later part. I think it's point 6 and 7 I've got here, or was it? That he was saying, well, okay, if the universe, can we distinguish between a self-existent thing as the universe and whether necessarily is a god? And he did sort of touch on that at the end of 21, I think.
I think it's a good point to raise that there's nothing really in this series that gets to the God of the Bible.
I haven't seen the next one, because doesn't he claim to do that in the next lecture, number 22?
Well, is that the one with the Kantian ethics?
Oh, sorry,
That's the one before. It's God of the Bible versus God of philosophy.
Right. What I didn't watch all of that. What argument does he actually? What actually did he bring in on that? Because is it something like the minimal fact of the resurrection or something like William Lane Craig uses? Does he use anything like that, or does he just sort of? I mean,
he spends it's most of my notes for this are all about the last couple of minutes, because a lot of it is addressed more specifically at his own audience.
Yeah, his first 15 minutes are spent kind of comparing the 2 concepts together and showing a lot of the similarities. So he starts to like his appropriation of the word logos to mean the organon of logic, right? Rather than to refer to a deification of the god, right? And I think like he uses a lot of that and talks about how our knowledge of God is going to be necessarily incomplete, and that we're not going to have a comprehensive knowledge of God. But claims that that's not a problem, and then towards I think Turdle's bringing up where he actually starts talking about something where he brings up Anthony Fleur's Jungle Garden, I think it's called, where he finds a garden that's being tilled, but there's no evidence of a gardener.
There's something about design there, isn't it? He makes some appeal to teleological argument, but again, I'm not getting anything distinct to tie the God of Christianity to this. If he, which of course he hasn't, but if he did establish essentially the God of the philosophers, how does he? It could have been that the God of the philosophers is the designer, or the God of the philosophers is somewhat moral or ethical. It's still not getting to the fact that Jesus was God and all the rest of it. Usually, what happens at that point is you'll get something a little bit like William Lane Craig's appeal to the four minimal facts about Jesus and the resurrection, and then there'll be some abductive argument to say, well, the best explanation for that is that Jesus essentially was God.
What are those four arguments, Fox?
The four minimal facts, I think,
that
Jesus existed, that Jesus was crucified, that Jesus that there was an empty tomb, and I think the fourth one might be something like there were eyewitnesses that claimed to see Jesus after he died. So the argument goes something like, well, there are various options that are supposedly on the table, and the best ones that come out of it is that Jesus was telling the truth when he said he was God, and that these people who afterwards saw him wouldn't have made up the fact that they saw this guy who had been killed, and well, there wasn't a body in the tomb anymore. So therefore, we can say that Jesus was telling the truth when he said he was God, because obviously it's possible for God to be resurrected. I mean, I've probably mangled that because it's not something that I'm all too clear on, but there are far better presentations of it by theists, and there are also very good refutations of it by atheists. Or even I think in some cases even theists themselves would say, well, that's just not a very good argument, even if they do believe ultimately that Jesus was resurrected. That would be something, right? That would be something, but Sproul doesn't offer any of that, which just further, to me, indicates what he's doing here is this is an in-house discussion. This is for Christians, people who already believe. This isn't really a good tool to take out to unbelievers, because at the best, all you can do is get them to say, well, maybe there is a God, right? But why should I think he cares? Why should I think he's your God? Why should I think he cares about gay marriage and all the rest of that? So usually apologetics is a little bit incomplete if you get to that stage. I mean, you've scored sort of a bit of a hollow victory, because at best you've got an atheist to say, all right, well, I'm a deist now, so what are you going to do?
I think that's a big achievement, though. I think if you could show...
definitely, it is. I mean, don't get me wrong, if you could show from sitting in your armchair and thinking about things that that there is an immaterial, changeless, timeless mind that created all of reality, that would be a cool thing. If you could do it, I would definitely, I'd praise anyone who could do that. I don't think anyone has done it. But at the same time, Christianity isn't just about the affirmation that such a being exists. It's more than that, isn't it? It's about a whole ethic. It's a whole way of life, and it's a belief in a whole historical narrative. So what grounds the truth of that for those who are in the audience, for those who espouse these apologetics? There needs to be something else. That at that point they're going to be like, oh, okay. So usually what you get from people like Craig is that kind of an argument, that there are reasons to think that Christianity is true, but we didn't see anything from Sproul's approach really. I mean, I didn't watch those videos in detail, but it sounds as if there isn't anything offered up there that would approach the four minimal facts argument.
No, I mean, I think the closest he gets to making that link is at the end of that section where he says that if we can infer intelligence or an intelligent personal entity that's created the universe or designed it for us, then we've moved away from abstraction to the God of the Scriptures, is how he puts it. And I think that is true, but he doesn't really make that case. He simply just says that purpose can't happen accidentally, and intelligence can't create unintelligently, and what is it? You can't have unintentionality intentionally.
Impersonality cannot produce personality.
I thought that one was the best one. It's just, it becomes just so absurd on its face. And he does this a lot, where he makes these really large assertions towards the end of the lecture. And I'm not sure if he does that like consciously, but it's clearly to sort of not leave the absurdity of that statement hanging in people's minds for very long. Because I think if they sat there and thought about it and then heard the rest of the lecture, you wouldn't be able to accept that assertion with any sort of serious attitude.
Are we going to have Trey join us?
Yep. Well, he's up to him. He said he's interested, so.
Well, if he comes in, I'll be surprised at this point. But
it's just going to be, he's going to open up with a really stupid insult about everybody in the room, and then.
Yeah, I mean, I have to say, I mean, we've not been particularly kind about at some points about RC Sproul, but we have at least tried, right, to understand the guy. We tried to. I think also we tried to. I mean, this is someone who remember Trey shouts about from the rooftops as being the main guy who's got this awesome argument that
Premier. He's the Premier guy, isn't he?
Yeah, he is. He's top of the pops, and we should all be listening to him. So we go out there and we do listen to him, and we also try to create a series where we can at least unpack and maybe find some common ground or clarify some of the issues, and maybe see how maybe Trey's got it a little bit wrong, or where Trey's justified, all those kind of things. We've made the effort to do that. You know, we've maybe talked about it in terms of trouncing Sproul and stuff like that, and dissecting Sproul. Maybe Trey takes that as a personal insult, and so he lashes out against it. But actually, I think we've been fairly reasonable, and I think we've at least attempted to build a dialogue there. Now, he on the other side, he has the opportunity to take up that. And I mean, when he came in for the second part, he didn't do anything productive. He just spat the same old stuff. And you know, he's since then has just accused us of being children who don't know what we're talking about, who tried to, you know, it's something like kindergartners tried to dismantle a nuclear reactor or some ridiculous thing like that.
I think he called us sixth graders, so maybe
sixth graders. Oh, okay, so that's not too bad then. But it's just like, you know, it's like, come on, Trey, what more do you want? You say in pretty much every hangout you have that. You think you're a serious thinker, you think you've got a capacity to think deep about things, and you know, you're just here to learn, and you want a dialogue and all the rest of it. And well, here it is. I mean, I think that's the illusion that RC Sproul gives to the believers, right? It's a lot of it's a very formal and systematized way of describing a way of coming to the conclusion. So I think it does sort of feel like he's a deep thinker, right? He's sort of brushing against topics that are a lot bigger than even Sproul is letting on. Yeah, I think that's fair. I think that's one of the things about philosophical apologetics. They have. I think it's sort of like. It's a video that's called Karate for Philosophy, right? And it's a way of giving the appearance, the posture of knowing karate. So here's Trey, and he goes out and he's swinging in philosophy circles with this ineffectual apologetic that he's been told is an effective form of apologetic. Yeah, I think it's almost tragic, really, because when we've looked at the source material, we've found very little depth. We've just seen someone who's just skirted over the surface of an interesting but difficult and complicated debate. And instead of being honest and saying, okay, I think there might be something to this. I'm gonna study at this. I'm gonna try to build an argument. I'm gonna read about what's going. I mean, there are some really super smart theistic philosophers out there building very complicated arguments from contingency in particular. You know, say you're going to go study those in your spare time. You don't have to, you know, it doesn't have to be your job. But at least be honest with other people and say, look, you know, I'm trying my best. I'm trying to build something here. This is just something that, you know, I don't find an infinite regress plausible. I don't find these other options plausible, and here's why, because I've studied this, and that. Or, you know, be honest, which is something we know that Trey never can be, and say, okay, I hold my hands up. This just isn't working, right?
He's not honest, though. We all know that.
No, we know that.
And you know what's funny in his conversation with John, this idea that he could, you know how we always talk about his false modesty, where he comes in and he goes, "Oh, I'm just an idiot. I'm just trying to learn like everybody else." And then in the same conversation say that we're a bunch of 6th graders trying to do nuclear fusion. And it's like, dude, I think I responded to him in the comments. I'm like, quit being a pompous asshole, because I mean, it's like saying I'm an idiot, but you're dumber than I am. You know what I mean? Like, it's this idea, and you know, Sproul kind of I mean, you can clearly tell that Trey not only copied as best he could Sproul's argument, but his attitude as well.
Yeah. I think that's what I was trying to point out to Trey, is that I think Sproul is really, his arguments are uncharitable to his interlocutor, and like we pick up on that quite a bit from Trey, that he's not fair to the person he's talking to.
Yeah, Trey thinks if he is just a nice guy, if he comes across as being a nice guy to people, as he's polite, he's kind of folksy, he's a bit silly, he thinks that means that he's being charitable, that he's doing his bit. When really we don't really care about that. You can be a complete and utter arsehole with people. You could be someone like Matt Bell, for instance, right? But if you have an argument, we want to know when we're having that. I mean, Matt Bell's uncharitable as well, obviously, of course. But the thing is, I don't care about your personality. I can put up with even insults from people, but I want to know that when I take the time to write a lengthy post where I try to unpack the problems as I see it and maybe build some kind of an understanding, or I go into Hangout and I talk to him for 2 hours or however long it is, you know, that's me going in there trying to understand him, trying to build a dialogue. And what I want from him is something back meaningfully. I don't care if it's something which exposes me for not knowing what I'm talking about, or if it says I need to go and look something up and read about something. That doesn't bother me. That's at least interesting. What I don't want to be confronted with is just this script with these little, okay, says X, go to does it happen? says Y, go to but is that contingent? That's not what I want, because that's not conversation, and that's all that
says he doesn't read the code, doesn't he? He says, "Oh, I didn't bother to read that, Fox."
He says that. He says I don't take it seriously.
What an absolute, you know, I could be quite rude here. That's just.
Can we get like a buzzer sound or a bell, so every time he answers a question with a question or a dodge, we hear a ding? Like,
well, it's odd you said that. I did actually get a noise ready for my one-on-one with him, where every word mentioned the word, because I was banning him from using the word happening, becoming, pure actuality, and becoming, and I was ready to give him a noise. He actually was very good with me. He did actually not use the words when I told him he couldn't do them. But yeah, you're right, absolutely right. Those four expressions, and happening, of course,
and when he was talking to John, the other thing he said, which is totally
he said happening to John. Sorry to butt in. That really annoyed me. He said, "Are you happening, John, or something to you?" And I thought, John, bloody go for him.
John, didn't he say to you something like, "We can't take a joke" or something? Like when he goes in his huckster kind of mode, where he's like, where he does the goading here and there. He goes, "Oh, you guys are too serious. You can't take a joke." And then in the same breath, just get oversensitive, like I think Rumpus called him something last time he was in it, and I called him a douchebag because he was being an idiot, and he got really upset.
Did he? I missed that. I didn't.
And this idea that he can sort of who made him the arbiter of you know, insulting people and kind of running how the conversation's going, and it seems part of his personality or tactic at least to, if he can't word salad the guy into submission or suicide, then he'll try to irritate him or get him off game by the cackling and the jokes and stuff. And John, you did a really good job by not getting carried away or getting sucked into that.
Yeah.
Yeah, he's Trey's just got an interesting style, and you can definitely tell when he's getting a little more frustrated. So it's I tried to keep that in mind and make sure I wasn't responding exactly to his frustration and more to what he was saying.
Okay, well he's got the link out. I've posted it to him several ways. So if he doesn't come up, I think we either need to go through the last ones that people have got notes on. I haven't watched the last couple. Go through
They're
those.
horrible. They're horrible.
Well, let's just move on. If he comes in, he comes in. Fine.
Yeah.
Do we get to say though that if Trey doesn't turn up, that he is a coward
Yeah.
who is running from hangout challenges?
Yeah.
Like Trey does to everybody else who doesn't manage to say, no, actually, I don't really want to go into hangout. Oh well, then your argument is your objection is defeated, or any criticisms are not valid because you won't come in and have it out with me in a hangout. So if Trey won't come in, then by his own logic, his argument is defeated.
Well, also according to Trey's logic, since neither one of us are converted by his argument, convinced, we're actually all converted. Like if he, I have that. Remember that screen capture I got? I'm not sure if you guys recall. I posted it, but I said, "Have you converted anyone with the argument?" He goes, "Everybody that doesn't understand it is converted."
Everybody that hasn't refuted it, I think, is.
Oh, refuted. That's right. Yeah, that's what it was. It was a while ago.
Did you see the post that Hogtie made detailing Trey's favourite responses? Say, my argument's only be if you're going to defeat my argument, you have to either deny the law of non-contradiction or we perceive reality correctly. I mean, that is not the most appalling piece of straw manning, or I'm not quite sure. It's just deceptive when he's given the number of assertions. I mean, just that list that I showed that he put into the self-existent properties that he just slips in. Any one of those you could deny, or any other number of assertions that he tries to slip in. He claims that's the only weak point of those first two. I mean, he's got to know that is, well, it's fundamentally a lie. I mean, it's just.
Does anybody think that Trey on some level knows when he's being underhanded, or do you think he's that deluded that he thinks that he has you in a gotcha situation?
I think delusions, when they're this strong, when he, the thing when I swore at Trey in the last one, it was when he acted surprised when Fox mentioned the possibility of an infinitely regressing universe, and he said, "Oh, what? No, act of surprise. I've never heard that before." I mean, something that Fox has been going on about for months.
Yeah, I'm not sure. I'm not sure how much Trey listens.
Okay.
I think it's a little bit like someone like G-Man.
Uncaused event? I've never heard that before. What's going on?
If you go into a situation thinking that you already have everything sewn up and everything sorted, and you've got something that can't possibly be wrong, then you don't really have to listen to what anyone says, because you've already got a set of sort of buzzwords and things that you can throw back at whatever they say. But also they can't possibly be right, and also they're depraved, and they are unbelievers, and they just want to sin, and all the rest of it. So it's every aspect of the conversation is already decided ahead of time, is predetermined for Trey. Doesn't matter what you say. You could go in there and just say blah 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 for 2 hours. He would still say the same things. The only reason to talk to Trey, really, I think, is just to expose him and just to show the mental gymnastics that he will go to try to remain credible. And the laughable thing where he says he's never had an objection that he can't rebut for his argument. It's just laughable. And the caliber of people that he's spoken to, people who are a lot more informed on the subject than he is and don't have a fucking clue what he's talking about half the time, or don't even think there's an argument there. I mean, I think for me this whole series it is kind of the definitive expose, I think, on the vacuity of these ideas, to just show that you can't claim to have a logically necessary argument, right? You can't claim that and present this kind of crap and be taken seriously by anybody. And I was wondering if I ever dipped back into Sproul, would I uncover something there that would get, okay, maybe now I can see, now it makes sense, now I can see where Trey's coming from. But it was so much worse than the first time I kind of briefly watched it. When I really started to get down into the details, I just saw someone who was just it wasn't presenting kind of a proper, rigorous philosophical argument, despite the fact that he claimed it was. It was just someone who was just spouting the worst kind of cheap, shallow apologetics, the kind of which that there are far better apologists and theistic philosophers out there who would just balk at the kind of the sight of this guy.
Okay, would we want to go on to the next episode then, if someone wants to?
Sure. Yeah, I think the next one is Kant's moral argument.
Oh my God, Trey's turned up.
Yeah, how about that? But yeah, I mean, Kant's moral argument. Sproul ends up using it as he claims that Kant in the Critique of Practical Reason talks about this idea that God would be necessary for society to exist and for us to have any sort of ethical system. And it seems like he really does just kind of hit on that over and over, that that this is sort of something that is sort of just a necessary structure for any social interaction to take place. Which I don't think I don't think he argues it very well, because he just ends up, by the end of it, he just says that to not have an objective basis for morals leads us to relativism, which he just calls neo-barbarism, and claims that any sort of relativist is a educated barbarian.
Oh yeah.
Which I think it's a really weird way of putting it. Unfortunately, that episode number 23 ends at about 9:23. The audio cuts out, so there is no more audio after that. But I noticed, I watched it without the audio, and he writes on the chalkboard. He writes justice, and then he writes a list of 4 items: life after death, perfect judge, omniscience, and omnipotence. So I was assuming that he was sort of talking about what would be necessary for there to be an objective judgment after about our lives here on Earth, right? And if that's the case, then I think he is sort of making that connection between morality and the necessity for a God. But I couldn't quite hear or make out what he was talking about.
I actually watched a video that did have the audio for that, but
really, okay,
yeah.
Cool.
But an odd thing about it, it still seemed to cut off. It seemed to cut off before he seemed finished with it. But I had to go back and make sure I didn't skip over it somehow in accident. But I think I had a similar thing, happen where I got just a piece at the end, and then it seemed to cut off before the end of his sentence. So. But yeah, I mean, it actually made me laugh out loud, because he just said what would be necessary for justice, and then the first thing he says is life after death, and I just laughed out loud.
Yeah, I mean, that was one of my main objections to it. Is it seems to just have to presuppose that very fact, and it seems like he hasn't made any sort of argument to bring that to.
What? I didn't see. So there's only justice if there's life after death.
That's the claim.
Yeah, because essentially he's saying because there is not perfect justice here on Earth, and we all are aware of this because sometimes people get away with things, or people who do good things are not, properly acknowledged or rewarded, or whatever the case. So if there isn't, life after death, then we just flat out do not have true justice, is essentially what he's saying.
Yeah, but it doesn't follow that. That doesn't follow to me. I mean, because there's no perfect justice here on Earth, or whatever, means that there has to be a perfect justice after life after death.
Yeah, it seems like he's arguing from consequence in that sense, right? Like he's claiming,
right? Yeah,
he's claiming that the conception of that life after death is necessary.
Doesn't make any sense.
He's arguing for what he wants.
Right. But in that way, I feel like he's appropriating Kant where Kant wouldn't agree with him, right? Like Kant never said that's the argument for God. He said that conception of God might be necessary for the establishment of an ethical system. So it's slightly different, right? Like it doesn't actually point to the existence of that thing truly. He's simply claiming that the consequences of believing in it would be a positive act for society.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it's a while since I read sort of Kantian ethics, but yeah, so the idea is that there is an intrinsic value to human beings, and I think that human beings are ends in themselves. Kant wouldn't, I think, would still be able to hold that, I guess, even if there wasn't any kind of God existing out there. So it's not quite as nihilistic, I think, as.
He kept on asking John whether he thought humans were special, didn't he?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, the argument about valuation is definitely one that I don't think me and Trey will probably ever see eye to eye on, because he seemed to have this idea that whoever created the thing is the person who sets the objective value of it. And I don't think that's an accurate way of describing valuation systems.
I mean, I mean, I think you made a really good point, actually, about, say, comic books.
Yeah,
like
that's awesome.
Yeah, or you know, someone, some artist sketches a painting. For them, it might be just a meal because they get to sell it, and then it becomes revered as a work of art and is valued as throughout history. You know, so
right. That artist could still think that painting was worthless or not worth very much, even though it has gained value. Yeah.
Yeah, they really didn't like it that's because value is subjective. So it isn't as if you can imbue. I mean, when we create things, we can create things that have certain properties, but I don't think value is a property that we add in. I think value is related to those properties and how those properties are perceived or understood or valued essentially by other people, not just ourselves. So what any one person to another values in anything that there is going to vary. I mean, it might be that there is agreement broadly, but it might be that there's a disagreement.
And I think the question, you know, what do I think is special, or do I think that humans are special, is sort of a disingenuous question in that sense, because I mean, I've kind of it wouldn't really matter if I thought that humans were special. My valuation system, as far as a moral system, could be separate from that, right? So I feel like it's sort of asking the wrong inquiry there.
Well, it depends what you mean by special. I mean, everything is special. Bacteria, you know, a particular rock is special, and so it's unique, certainly, as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah, we had that same argument, you know, like what makes a rock special, and it seemed to me like he was admitting that it was context dependent and that it could change from moment to moment, and yet seemed to think that there was some sort of objective scale that we could put that rock onto, which I don't think is the case.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's asking you whether you valued humans or something more than other things, but yes, it's a simple matter of recognizing they're conscious beings that feel pain in the same way that you do. Via empathy, you understand that they are. You could treat them slightly differently to non-conscious entities. I mean, you wouldn't worry about an amoeba or something, but something with a sort of developed nervous system, which you recognise can have pain and emotions. I mean, even some sort of bunny rabbit or something, you would think, oh, I don't want to inflict pain on that, because we've been evolved not to inflict unnecessary pain on things. It's not to our interest, and so you don't.
It's the difference between kicking a rock and kicking a baby, right? Like I would feel bad about one and not the other. I mean, I'll leave it up to you guys which one that is.
Yeah, I mean, the fact that Trey thinks such a question is worth asking, it suggests that he really he's coming from a very strange perspective.
Yeah, right in the beginning of this lecture, he brings up kind of that along the same lines, this idea that God has written His law in all men's hearts, and that's why we feel guilt, and that's kind of a subject that he goes into for a while. But I mean, anyone who's familiar with evolution has an answer for that already. But one thing that I kept on thinking multiple times when he's saying these things is that psychopaths kind of don't follow the rules that he thinks that we do. I mean, if God has written His law in all men's hearts, why do we have psychopaths? Psychopaths, to me, undermine that whole idea.
Yeah, well, presumably there's this idea that you're repressing this. I mean, that he presumably regards. I mean, does he believe? Is that what he even brings up? Everyone knows God, that they're repressing that knowledge.
I don't know what he thinks exactly, but I mean, he even brings up psychopaths and sociopaths in the before he really gets into that, and then kind of just dismisses them and moves on. But I mean, that's if he's saying that, like you said, that they're suppressing these ideas, I don't think that matches up with any science that we have on psychopaths, because as far as I understand it, psychopaths actually lack the ability to empathize with other people, and that's why they behave the way they do.
And of course, this idea of having something written on your heart doesn't make it a good God. I mean, we could have a bad, evil God that writes, or I mean, I could, in theory, presumably, if we could create people with a particular motive, that doesn't mean to say that we've done a good thing, or that what's written in someone's heart is good. An evil God. I mean, of course, this is all doesn't deny the possibility of an evil God. Of course, any of this.
Right. Yeah.
And I think, and some people say, oh well, what about the wonderful emotions that you might have? But then you could say, well, actually, it's like a roller coaster that I've made you feel all these wonderful emotions and experiences, only to drag you down to death or pain or illness, just to make that pain extra worse. Because if you lived with constant pain, it wouldn't be so painful. You know, but relatively, it's more painful to have been felt good than feeling bad than it would be to feel miserable and then feeling a bit worse. So you can argue that all the wonderful things that an evil god could be equally responsible for all the wonderful things that happen you, just to make the pain when you do feel bad that much worse. I think it's a Stephen Law's type of theory there, and I think it's perfectly reasonable. You can argue that everything we see about us is completely consistent with an evil god.
Or an indifferent one.
Yes, I mean, yeah, the whole variety. Yeah, there's a whole gamut of possibilities. Yeah. Do we want to go? If Trey's not going to come in, then do we want to summarise?
Well, he was here briefly. I don't know what happened to him.
Yes, I don't know whether we. I mean, I was going to start to speak actually, but then he went to. Yes. I don't know where he felt was ignored or something. I didn't mean.
Well, if you're watching Trey, you can always come back in, and we will let you speak. Say what you need to say.
So perhaps then, while if he is watching, we perhaps would go on to some sort of summary of what we think of the whole what we've seen of the whole lecture. I haven't seen the last couple, but I think I'm.
Did you not get any better?
Do we want to talk? I didn't watch very much of the next one, and that's where I ended up stopping. But because there's two more after the one that we just were talking about.
Yeah, but I suppose in theory we could always come back for a final chat on it if we.
Oh shit.
With Trey in it or something, perhaps.
Well,
dedicated to Trey.
I think I don't know. I think it's kind of run its course. For me personally, I think.
Yeah.
John,
if John's got more to say on this, let's get to John's.
Yeah, man, I'm not sure. I mean, if you guys want to hold
No,
off,
John, we've been just in your.
No, I'm fine. I'm when I say I think is in another part. That's what I meant. I don't mean. I mean, I'm happy.
He doesn't want to come back.
Yeah.
Yeah,
no, John,
Fox started this whole thing, and he's tired of it. So what did that tell you?
Yeah, I mean, the next one is, what is it, 24? So that it's vanity of vanity, he calls it, and sort of points out that he sort of makes this. He kind of boils down all philosophy to two things, where it's either on one end of a spectrum, which is theology, and the other end of a spectrum, which is nihilism. And he attempts to, and he even claims that, out of the thousands of possible distinct philosophies, all of them fall along this continuum. And he really does. He defines it in really strange ways. Like he uses theology as meaningless at the beginning, and nihilism is meaningless at the end, which I think it's a really weird way of saying it. And I don't know. I think it's in the end
is meaningless at the beginning of what time?
Yeah, I think I have the quote here. He says that. The meaningless, the two poles, so the theism, he points at theism and he says meaninglessness at our origin, and then he points at nihilism and he says meaninglessness as our destiny. So I think that's the way that he's sort of structuring it. He sees it as either there's an ultimate purpose to things, or there was a purpose, there was no purpose before the beginning. And I don't know, I mean, it seems to me that this whole thing is simply so that he can push every philosophy that he doesn't feel supports theology to nihilism, and then use that category of nihilism to dismiss the whole thing, as if once you accept one part of nihilism, you have embodied the entire idea of nihilism, and think that everything becomes meaningless.
Yeah, I've noticed that Sproul likes to put things in definite boxes, right? Like he has his way of just broad brush, and I guess it's a way it's easier for him to strawman everything, and it's kind of despicable at a guy his age. Is he alive, Sproul?
He's ill apparently. I think I saw some video when I was doing the searches that his health has deteriorated a bit, and he does look a bit poorly.
Oh, okay.
But so he's still around. But I mean, I don't know whether we should take this Defending the Faith series as a real sort of hardcore philosophical apologetic for religion, or whether or not he's just simply preaching to a bunch of obviously rather.
No, yeah, I mean, but I mean, if when we get to part 25, I mean, all he's going to do is all he does is say that it's called the psychology of atheism, right? So all he's going to do is pathologize and claim that our motivation to not believe and to not understand is going to override any sort of conscious decision that we have to try to understand. And I think it's really that just boils down to the whole thing that RC Sproul is not being charitable to the person that he is supposed to be talking to, which is the unbeliever, is who ostensibly this whole thing is supposed to be directed at. And I think that's really the key, right? He only wants to dismiss the opposition rather than convince the opposition.
Yes, because of course part of this thing is that he's not there to persuade, only to present the facts, isn't he? That's his...
Yeah, I mean, I found it really interesting to note that he even sort of, at the beginning of that Romans, is it Romans? I think.
Yeah, I think it is Romans.
It's first, maybe I think it's in 1 Peter actually that I'm talking about, where he says that, we're supposed to be ready to give a reason to give a defense for anyone who asked us of a reason, right? And I found it I read it back and I noticed that. He's only called to give a defense. He's not called to actually be reasonable or give any sort of rational argument. He simply, and he does it amply. He defends it, right? He pushes the objections away from himself, and I think that is the essence of a defense and not a reason. And I think Sproul has just embodied that, right? I think people are asking him for reasons, and he's just simply giving a defense.
Right, that's interesting.
Yeah, he's building a bomb shelter.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think as well, what I take away from this is that for all of the bluster about being somehow better than the presuppositionalists, okay, he is presupposing it, but he's not as honest as a presuppositionalist in saying that he's presupposing these things, because his account just doesn't get him to where he claims it goes. So there must be something making up the deficit here, and it is just his pre-existing beliefs. I mean, he even says it at one point, I think, in the later series and later episodes, where he talks about how he admits he could not live. The idea of a universe without God for him is just unthinkable. It's terrible. It's awful. For me, he is someone who is more dishonest than a presuppositionalist, because they just assume that that God is. It's in their hearts. They don't need any further proof. What this is designed to do is to shut the mouths of the unbelievers. It's to not really give an argument, as John said. It's to give a defense, and that's exactly what the presuppositionalists will do. If you speak to some better evidentialists, they will say, well, this is my case. This is why I believe, or even some better classicists, I guess, they would still at least say, well, these arguments are compelling to me. They've got some philosophical weight behind them. But Sproul isn't really. He wants to be in that category, but he's not really. I think he is in the category of the presuppositionalist for me, because he just has that level of assumption about him, and just the way he uncharitably dismisses people left, right, and centre. Just for me, shows someone who doesn't really want to, who isn't confident. Really, he can't be that confident in the subject material, because he isn't willing to give a proper appraisal of what the actual objections would be. And you see this with Trey as well. Trey is Sproul's defensiveness and bunker mentality gone out into the world, and he's come across and he's been confronted by genuine objections. And what do we see? We see just dismissal. We see condescension. We see someone who isn't willing to engage, and who believes as dogmatically as any presuppositionalist I've ever come across on Google Plus, or I've ever watched in any series or read about. It is just that presupposition is still there, that without God, if something exists, then God exists. I exist, therefore God exists. It might be a slight technical step away from what the presuppositionalist is doing, but in spirit, at least, I think it's the same sort of thing. And it's just dishonest. It's intellectual dishonesty of the highest order, and this man is a charlatan and a hack and a fraud. And anyone who is foolish enough to invest their sole kind of philosophical outlook in his works is a moron.
Yeah, I mean, I think I agree. I mean, I think RC really does want to push away from presuppositional apologetics, but I think it's only because it does the inference that the opposition is biased against us right away, right? Like presuppositionalist is very upfront that they're going to pathologize the opposition into that's why they won't believe it, no matter what. And I think RC Sproul, the only difference is that he takes 6.5 hours to get to that assertion.
Yeah, it's a fig leaf. It's a fig leaf covering an elephant, right? That's what this is. It doesn't work. It's just from start to finish, and it really almost is from start to finish. We see a man implanting in the minds of his audience seeds of, like, he poisons the well, seeds of mistrust for the opposition, an assumption that, don't worry, no matter where I take you, no matter what philosopher I talk about, what direction I go down, you are never ever going to leave the comfort that you already have, that the God that you believe exists. And at the end, I'm just going to show you a nice set of words that you can say to someone who doesn't agree with that, so that you feel that you've offered up something as substantive. I think sometimes the problem with people who are presuppositionalists is they almost feel guilty about being so question begging and quite so circular. They're not quite ready to go there, so they want this fig leaf to put over their question begging and their assertions and their presuppositions, and that's not all theists. That is just some theists that I come across. Sproul is like that. Trey is like that.
Yeah, Sproul is unusual in that he's an attempt to use deductive logic to get to God, and it is quite interesting to see someone who's trying that on. But
anyone who's familiar, anyone who's familiar with logic will know that it isn't logically necessary that God exists, right?
Yes,
At least not in the broadest possible sense. There are people, there are theists till they're blue in the face, will say that God is metaphysically necessary, but it just isn't in this day and age. I mean, what we mean by something being logically necessary is that it would, for it not to be the case, it would be essentially a contradiction. It would invoke a contradiction. Saying God doesn't exist doesn't invoke any kind of logical contradictions. So at best, all you can say is that we've got a metaphysical argument that says there has to be something that is metaphysically necessary. Now even that is debatable, or what that kind of what that thing is that's metaphysically necessary. Sproul doesn't even do that. He goes for the thing that will ensure he doesn't have to do any of that, and that's why it's a very lazy apologetic. He says, well, if you claim you've got logical necessity, then really your work is done, because you don't. If anyone challenges you, anyone brings up an objection, you just pigeonhole it into these absurd categories, which he thinks are clearly contradictory, and you then just invoke the law. Well, you're violating the law of non-contradiction, or you're violating the law of identity. That's what happens. That's what always happens, because it's just a fraud to say that this is a logically necessary deductive argument. It's not.
do we want to do a summary then? If John's finished his analysis of the last one, we can summarise. I think you did quite a good summary there, Fox. I don't know if
well, that was my summary, yeah. So
okay.
if anyone else's.
Anyone else wants to make a summary then?
Yeah, mine's really fast. It's all shit. Okay, hi, John. No, it's just ultimately unconvincing, and I kind of agree with Fox, but I won't be nearly as eloquent. I believe at some point Fox insinuated that Trey is a moron, just because he said something to the effect of anyone that kind of buys into it is kind of a moron, referring to Sproul. But what bothers me, you can adopt any sort of apologetic you want, to help you sleep better at night, if that's what you need. But if Trey came on and he had a better attitude, where it's like, okay, this is what I'm going with, and then he was really, really interested in what we had to say, then said, let me go take a look at this and I'll come back and, we'll talk again. But he's not, and now that I saw these Sproul videos, I can understand why. I mean, when you fill up a vacuous person with a vacuous argument, the same shit happens, right? So ultimately, you feel empty, and much like Trey's argument, it ends up being just a big giant waste of time. And I think we've all talked about at least once now, right? So effectively, Trey and his argument are now the herpes of this community. So thanks, Trey.
Okay, Turdle, do you want to go?
Sure. Yeah, it's there's a lot here, and there's also not a lot here. My
That's good.
That was my point. That was my point, Turdle. Sorry to interrupt.
yeah. So I agree with Heathen then. No, I feel pretty similar to the way I felt when I first started watching these videos, and I was just waiting to get to the crux of the argument, and I mean it takes until like what till he gets to those 4 possibilities really before you get into his argument, and the rest of it to me seems to be I'm getting a little bit of an echo.
Someone's echoing. I think you Mischief.
Oh, me?
Yeah, I think you're echoing. I think you're causing Turdle to echo. Someone is anyway.
Yeah, it's better now. But I feel like the rest of it is set up in a way so that I mean he's got these law of non-contradiction. He spends a whole lecture on that, and then a whole lecture on law of causality, and a whole lecture on reliability of sense perception. And I still have no idea why we spent a lecture on reliability of sense perception.
Yeah, the illusion one or something. Yeah.
Yeah, and it seems like the whole point of those is to kind of assert that your argument is based on these things, and that way, when kind of like Fox was saying, when somebody confronts you with disagreement, you can just say, well, as Trey does, you're violating the law of non-contradiction. And so you're just kind of setting up these as a firewall so that you don't have to actually argue what the real crux of your argument is. You've got these kind of barriers around your argument. So, because nobody wants to sit there and say that the law of non-contradiction is false. So if you shield your argument with the law of non-contradiction, then you've kind of made yourself a safe little place where you can live. And I feel like that's what a lot of this is, and a lot of it too is just kind of fluff for the audience too. So yeah, I don't know. There's I will give credit to Trey. I'm getting echo again. Sorry. I will give credit to Trey for being able to keep some of the stuff straight in his mind, because it's mind-boggling to me. And being able to argue it is somewhat impressive. But yeah, that's pretty much all I have on that.
Okay, John, do you want to go?
Yeah, I mean, I think I agree. I mean, there's some great points hit by everybody there. If I had one thing to add, it would be that, Sproul's point in this is not necessarily to provide like a really knockdown argument, although he kind of presents it as if he's going to give that. The entire lecture series really should be taken as kind of a whole, because he's really building towards that eventual pathologization of his opponent, right? And I think he even sets it kind of right from the very beginning. I think it's about part 3 or part 4, where he says that there's like 4 points of attack that all of the big atheist and critical thought about theology really has been hitting. And he includes, the law of non-contradiction, the law of causality. What's the other one? Analogical language and the principles of reliability. Yeah, and so I mean he's basically taking what we've built, these concepts that we use every day, and that we're sort of required to navigate even just in our discussions of these things, and tries to appropriate them for his apologetic, right? So, and I think that's what it is, right? I mean, he wants to be able to point to something that it seems uncontroversial or incontrovertible, and say something like, well, then you're disagreeing with the law of non-contradiction, because none of us want to be that irrational person. And I think if you really read in between the lines, and even what he says in the lecture series, he constantly hits on the idea that to disagree with his position in this case would make you an irrational person. He even says it, just a couple times, just straight out right, like, fine, if you want to be irrational, you can disagree with me. Fine if you want to be on the side of irrationality or to argue against logic. And I think, positioning yourself and posturing yourself in that very stance, I think is really the key to this whole lecture series. Is it's meant to make your position appear to be the intellectually sound one, and to sort of just ad hominem dismiss everything else that doesn't quite fit in with that paradigm. So I think that's really the only thing I would add.
Can I say one more thing, Rumpus, before you close out?
Of course.
Sorry for the echo. I think it was me. But, you know, when Trey was talking to somebody, I forgot who it was, a couple days last week, and it's actually inspired a topic for my show coming up. But his whole point was, you know, I showed your worldview to be incoherent, or your worldview doesn't work. It's, you know, much in the same way a presuppositionalist will say, you know, I reduced your worldview to absurdity if you follow it through logically. And I found that a really amusing kind of tactic. I haven't heard him say that before as a goal, right? Oh, it was Xbox Fiend. That's what it was. If you get a chance to watch that one, that one's pretty good. Xbox Fiend is a pretty nice guy. Yeah. And I just kind of found it odd that was the goal. And John could have jogged my memory. It's not so much he has an argument for God. It's the idea that I can show that you're being irrational, and I guess therefore win by default. I'm not sure how that works, but just thought I would bring that up.
Yeah. Okay. Well, yeah. Lots of great points there. Certainly, Trey seems to me to be using more sort of debating tactics rather than actually. I get the impression if Sproul was in Trey's position, he would actually be engaging with us much more honestly and actually listening to people's posts and reading people's posts and listening to their arguments instead of cutting them off or always answering a question. You get the impression that Trey is simply, he regards he's doing God's work or something, and he's prepared to therefore to use any number of rather unpleasant tactics and contemptible tactics in what he's doing. But unfortunately, and I think a lot of it's to disguise the fact that Sproul basically is not a very good philosopher. I mean, just the progression he offered about the impossibility of the contrary in his four possibilities, the way he leads from, oh, I can sort of get to the idea from this concept of self-existence, that something self-existent. You can sort of make a sort of case for this, and then from there on slip in so many assertions. And if he was a decent philosopher, either he's a bad philosopher in the sense he's doing this and doesn't realise it, which I think is quite possible, or he's dishonest and he's slipping this in thinking, well, I'm just doing God's work, therefore I'm entitled to be dishonest, I'm entitled to do this. And the sort of philosophy he offers, I mean, I know he's talking to bunch of Christians, it is sort of playground philosophy, it seems to me. There are very few rigor, there's so little rigor, and it's just so sloppy. All of it is just sloppy, more like a wishful thinking than anything else. You might find it in a, you know, we talk about sixth graders, I think, Trey. This seems to me like sixth grader logic, 95% of it.
Yeah, I mean, it seems to me like he thinks that that he hasn't formally presented his argument, or that he sort of it feels like he wants it to just be like a colloquial conversational argument, and I think that he's really ignoring the fact that sort of academic rigor that he wants to portray himself as is going to be the people who are going to observe it are going to look at the premises he has written down, right? And I find it really difficult to wrap my head around like how he's written books on the same topic, and he must have written down this lecture series at some point.
Exactly, and in fact, if you read his book, it's almost identical. I didn't realise. I read the book actually before I looked at the series, and I thought, okay, the book's, you know, and then I suddenly realised that in fact there was no difference, and the book was. It's not as though he's toned down his thinking to present it in his video series. The book is identical. It's on the same intellectual level.
I mean, he uses the same stories about the philosophers that he talks to and about the university student that he showed up, and it's the exact same wording and things too in some cases, and just as vague and doesn't provide any citations.
Yeah, well, that's the thing, isn't it? I mean, come on, like you're trying to prove the existence of God by just talking and thinking, right? It's going to be a little bit more in depth than this folksy kind of, you know, off the cuff, colloquial, rambling story for 6 hours. You're going to have to present papers. You're going to have to present formal syllogisms, and you're going to have to defend that, and you're going to have to actually do some work. Sproul hasn't done that.
Yeah, in fact, the only thing is actually
anyone who thinks that's how you arrive at these awesome truths about how reality is, again, is an idiot. And also, I mean, you just cannot do it. There are, you know, it isn't that easy, and that's the deceptive allure of this kind of apologetic.
I mean,
It lets people who are just to finish off. It lets people who are uneducated and who are not very used to this kind of argument, but get a get rich quick kind of answer. That's what this is for. That's who this is going to appeal to, and Trey is a case in point for that.
The closest I think Sproul comes to any sort of substantial philosophy, I mean, you've got to be better measure this than me, Fox, but is if we have something that exists now, therefore there must have been, we can never have had nothing, which of course disagrees with Trey, and therefore there must have been something self-existent. That's the only bit of argument you could find in there that's remotely valid. And that's it.
It's like a low-rent William Lane Craig. That's what Sproul is.
Yes.
He makes William Lane Craig look like Ludwig Wittgenstein.
Yeah.
or Frege, something like that. That's what he does. I mean, I've said it 1,000 times. I'll say it one last time. There are better people out there. There are far smarter apologists and theistic philosophers out there that I personally would rather spend the time trying to get to grips with and understand. Even there might be a point where I don't understand that, it's just too complicated. Someone like Plantinga or something like that. When you get into the formal presentations of some arguments, people like Alexander Proust, those kinds of people, they're presenting difficult, really cutting edge, working within developments within philosophy. They're not just saying, right, well, philosophy was only really good back in the day, when Aristotle and Aquinas were well, obviously they were part by over a millennium, but back in the day, that's when we didn't need any more advances in philosophy. We didn't need to do anything, but they had it all sorted out. And Sproul actually thinks that, and Trey thinks that. I mean, he said that in his hangout with John yesterday. I think something to the effect of, well, we've lost our way, and that's just, and so this isn't just a philosophical argument. This is just like an archaic argument. This is just like a really old-fashioned position.
That's the other thing I meant to mention. Yes.
I mean, there are still people out there using Aristotle. There are still people out there using Aquinas. But for God's sake, they're giving it a modern twist. They're putting it into something that has taken on board, not just ignored. Since Aquinas, what we're talking about, 600, 700, 800 years of developments of philosophy. It isn't just saying, oh, well, that's all just gone wrong. Right? It isn't that simple, almost conspiracy theory-like narrative. It's actually saying, well, we're going to do a fusion. We're going to take these old ideas and these old concepts, and we're going to update them. And that's actually interesting. That's something which people out in this community, someone like Max does that. It's possible to do it, but it isn't. You can't just stop the clock and say, right, anything beyond this is nonsense. Everything beyond this is awesome. I'm just going to regurgitate that.
But you know what?
I'm bursting here. There was a very telling in his debate with John the other day was that he said he was very sad to see that we'd moved on from the four causes that Aristotle was keen on, and he then also tries to introduce this idea of an instrumental cause as a sort of subset of efficient cause, when it's just simply like the screwdriver you might be holding. But then he's forced into denying, well, are babies, are the mother parents, are they the efficient cause of babies? Apparently not. So you're only then left with, if that's the case, then all the ancestors to that are also instrumental cause until you get back to the start of the universe. So in fact, the only efficient cause, I think, in Trey's mind, in effect, I don't know whether he's realised this is a conclusion he's come to, is the start of the universe. Yeah. And the other thing is, oh, bugger, I forgot. Oh, the book. He's also, just in case we're thinking that Sproul is dumbing down for this defending of the faith on this particular occasion, he's written some other books, including a book called Chance. Which,
it's got Not a Chance.
Yeah. Sorry. And it's the most appalling thing ever.
It's terrible. It's terrible. Yeah.
It's just this describes in this review of how an appalling monstrosity of sloppy thinking is. So he just does the same thing again, and it's just defending the faith. No different.
Yeah, I mean, I thought it was really odd how he sort of he allowed that scientist to sort of reify the concept of chance and then sort of runs with that straw man. And I thought that was just sort of a one-off mistake that he made, but he's got a whole book that he basically does. He expands on that.
Yeah, it's appalling.
The one thing that always escapes me about Trey is, and I've pretty much seen most of his video or his hangouts with other people, but when you have, I know basically shit about philosophy, right? I rely on you guys. I appeal to your authorities. No, I'm just kidding. No, I mean, there are people with varying degrees of knowledge on this stuff, and myself and other people in all aspects of their knowledge of philosophy every person pretty much either got really close or they all had an issue with it on some form or fashion. And you would think on some level Trey would sit back and go, well, either I'm not explaining this as well as I should be, or there's possibly something wrong, but everything just seems to bounce off his forehead, and like doesn't never sinks in. And I'm thinking to myself, man, if I had this argument and multiple people were just bringing up either the same exact objections, and in one form or another, or even new ones, it would cause me to pause if I truly was being intellectually honest about things. But that never, I don't understand how that never really sinks, or does Trey even care, at that point? But I mean, as far as
I think that's what Sproul is trying to defend against in that last. And I didn't see the last lecture, but he's saying atheists will not accept what you're saying, essentially.
Yeah, I think the thing about Trey is he is what Lenin would have called a useful idiot, right? He is someone who, even you tell a very simplified version of the truth. It's like in Lenin's case, the truth of communism. You have people who go out there who do, because they've absorbed this kind of almost childlike view of something in which is ultimately true, or whatever it is, in the person who's telling this to the person. They go out there and they are further, they are like cannon fodder. They just go out there. They shut up the annoying non-believers. They present a front. They make it look like at least we're trying to do something. All the while, RC Sproul sits back. He's a bit more intelligent. He's going to present. He's going to make these kind of video series where there's no right of reply, where there's no atheists in the audience. I mean, to credit Trey, he is out there on the front line with this terrible, terrible argument. He's like almost like a lion led by a donkey. It's this terrible argument that he's pushing, and he's too stupid to realize that he's just being used by someone like RC Sproul. Because I mean, I would never, if I was in RC Sproul's position, I genuinely cared about Christianity and also about being intellectually honest, I would never put out a series that bad. I just wouldn't. I mean, I would try to give something better as a weapon to go out there with. And it's as if he just has put this out there and has thought, well, people will just use it to shut up the mouths of unbelievers, and that's all that I think that Sproul's gameplay is in this.
Well, I think you're right in that. I went out last week to where I'm at to watch Ray Comfort proselytize, and because he's out where I'm at, they're showmen. The Sproul, Comfort, they're all showmen, and I think part of Trey's act is, if you go to the layperson up on the street, just walking past by, right, and you start talking about Aristotelian this and that and stuff, it sounds really like you know what you're talking about. You know what I mean? Like it can be intimidating for people that go and don't know, and it's kind of, I think, underhanded, at least the way it's presented, but that's how I see it.
Okay.
RumpusS, that's you, buddy.
Yeah. Okay. I was just going to screen share very quickly something here, and just to demonstrate. Oh, I don't know. Bugger! I can't. It's no good. I'm gonna have to. I was drawing a Venn diagram in which had the outer one was events and the inside circle was called effects. Just as a final thing. Anyway, I think that's it. So great. Well, I think we did a pretty reasonable job on that. And
for sixth graders, yeah. I think
yeah, for sixth. But that's Trey's opinion. Therefore, is invalidated. So anyway, okay. So great stuff, people, and thank you very much, anybody who's watching. Bye.